Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mark. It's been a little while since I last made a video. I do apologize for that. I got caught up with stuff with work and life and things like that. So I do apologize for dropping off mid-season last year. I do feel really bad about that. I do hope to get back into it. I think but probably won't be able to commit to as much as I had been doing, especially late in the year or like as the year started last year. So I'm gonna try to see if I can make some more videos, but try to maybe not be as frequent during the week. Maybe my goal is to try to do about like two per week, at least when the season gets going. I think what I was trying to do like four. I think that was probably too much, but I did enjoy like all of the comments that I was getting, and all the people that asked for help and stuff like that. I really did enjoy that a lot. That really meant a lot to me, and I do appreciate the support. And I hope I was able to kind of help you out as well for when I was active. And I do apologize for if I left some of you guys hanging. But for those of you who are new, I do fantasy football, and I kind of have specific rules that I like to follow. And some of my predictions, I would say, from last year, I was not right about, but I do think that some of the general trends that I was projecting, a lot of them did hold true. So in this video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk specifically about like how my reaction to the fantasy or implications from free agency, and I'm gonna look specifically at the quarterbacks today. So look at some of the other positions later on. There's obviously still a lot of the offseason left. We got the draft and everything, but I'm gonna look at reflection of what's happened so far in free agency and how that could impact next year. So before I get into that, I just want to recap my strategies. You can go back to the very first video that I made. I talk about this as well. So my rules, my number one rule is that there's seven of them. So the first rule is that you don't win at the draft. You win by the rules that the moves that you make during the season. And that's kind of self-explanatory. Like you can't auto draft and then plug and play. You got to pay attention to what's going on throughout the season with your players that you do have, and then players in waivers, because the waiver players really can have a big impact on your season. So really pay attention to those as well, because there's a lot of gems out there on the waivers that you can pick up, and there's also moves that you need to make with your specific roster that can help you buy low, sell high on players, and try to sell people high so you can get somebody low that's going to help you the rest of the season. So I like to try to find players on my team that are the focal point of their offense. So I like people that I know they're going to get the top targets on their team on an offense that's pretty competent, and because especially in PPR when they're getting a lot of receptions, that's going to help them a lot. So for me, I always really liked guys like DeAndre Hopkins because he was always getting targets with the Texans. But as we all know, he got traded, and I don't even know what to make of that trade. That was just insane. But I'm going to talk about some of the impacts that I think that'll have on Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray in a bit. I'll get to the impacts on the receivers later on. But basically, I want to try to find the guys that are going to get the most touches. Like, you look at Christian McCaffrey, the number one player in fantasy football. The reason he was is because the offense was good enough to get by. So he did better than Saquon Barkley, for example. But Christian McCaffrey was the only option for the Panthers, really. And that's why he had that historic season, was because they relied on him heavily. So I try to find guys like that, and those will really help you out on your team. When you do draft, you want to stock up on running backs and wide receivers, because as I'll talk about, like, those are positions that you can trade away and get value for the other positions that you may need, like quarterback or tight end. Or you could stream quarterbacks or tight ends, but you can't really do that as easily with running backs and wide receivers. So that's why I like to stock up on them. And then I try to go for guys that have potential more than guys that are just kind of already hit their ceiling and are just a modest gain type player. An example that I talked about last year, I think when I made this video, I can't remember, it was one of those, but it was talking about Dante Moncrief versus Deontay Johnson. And as you know, Deontay Johnson ended up being one of those sleepers that you found on the waivers midseason and really helped you out down the stretch. But Dante Moncrief was cut midseason, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, try to find guys that are up and coming rather than the guys that are just flat production line that probably aren't going to really improve much. During the season, I like to check the waivers every day. That's my fifth rule. So in that one, basically, always keep an eye on what's going on in the waivers because some people are dropping players that shouldn't be dropped. Sometimes people don't pick up people that should be dropped. Just always keep an eye out for that because it could really help you out. You'll be surprised at what's available. And then along with that, like constantly evaluate your roster stock. Pay attention to the schedule of the players that you have coming up as well as, is this player that just broke out and had a good game? So like Sammy Watkins week 1, is that going to ever happen again? Hopefully you sold him after week 1, which is something that I said if you go back and watch that video. Just saying. But, things like that can really, if you evaluate your stock every week of these players, what they're going to likely do rest of the season, that'll really help you out with building your roster so they can compete for the playoffs. And then number 7, so try to get as much depth as you can on your roster at the key positions like running back and wide receiver because those are the most positions that you play. Don't really necessarily need at least 2 quarterbacks. Or you would generally only need 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 1 kicker, 1 defense. But the other positions you want to try to stock up. In general, you only want 1 of those 4 positions that I mentioned, but there's exceptions. But basically, and then you get advice for your matchup going into that week, and you can kind of use the next couple days. I like to use the weekend to do that. The week I try to manipulate trades, try to figure out like guys that I want to stock who might have a good week, and then kind of figure out what's going to happen from there. So if you want more explanation of that, you go back to the very first video that I made. I talk about that. Those are examples specific to the 2018 season, though, because that was almost a year ago when I made that video. But in this specific video, I want to talk about some of the free agent moves that have happened and how that's going to impact the quarterbacks in terms of their fantasy value. So, number 1, we have to hit the most groundbreaking thing that happened in the offseason this year, and that was Tom Brady jumping ship to jump on the pirate ship, for lack of better words, and join the Buccaneers. I did not see that coming at all. I thought, if anything, he was going to go to the Chargers just because of the LA hype. But, I mean, Tampa Bay was, that's surprising because that team has generally, never been, aside from the year they won the Super Bowl in 2002 or 2003, they really have, not had, since then, have just not had a successful run at all, really, other than a few playoff appearances. But there's a lot of potential there. I understand why he went there with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin coming up, and they have talented tight ends that are generally underused, like O.J. Howard. Cameron Braid has also still got potential. So there's a lot of value, and I see of why he went there. I don't think it was as much the fact that he hates Bill Belichick or whatever the media is trying to spin. But I think that how do I think this will affect Tom Brady specifically? So I've been saying this last year is that a lot of people will reach for Tom Brady because of his hype, and in reality he's not going to be worth the position that he's getting drafted at. And I think that is especially going to be true this year. So I think that I don't think Tom Brady is going to be and smart fantasy players do not take him in the first round, for example. I don't think there's many people that are dumb enough to do that anymore. But there are going to be people that are going to be taking him very high around the range of somebody like Deshaun Watson, for example. And still, even without and I'm going to talk about Watson in a little bit, but still, even without DeAndre Hopkins, I would still take Watson over Brady. And as I talk about, and it's because of Watson's ability to run the ball. When you have a running quarterback that's a threat to run for a touchdown or just to run for 50 yards a game, that gives you such an amazing floor that you can work off of. And especially if they don't throw interceptions, then you're already got a baseline that's going to exceed whatever the pocket quarterback who doesn't run at all is. And that's kind of the case with Tom Brady. Just look at why Lamar Jackson was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy last year. It's because he ran for so many yards ran for so many touchdowns that he gave you a floor base that simply no other quarterback could have. So when he does have those ridiculous games where he passes for 5 touchdowns, he just exceeds by far what any other quarterback is doing out there. So with that being said, I do not justify taking Tom Brady in the draft as high as he's going to go. I do think he's going to be a more productive player than last year, but I think that Tom Brady's hype is going to be way beyond what you want to be drafting. So I would personally try to avoid him if you can. I would try to get running backs or wide receivers probably at the position that Tom Brady is going to be drafted. Try to get a quarterback later on who can give you decent value for about the same production, but is going to go a lot later in the draft. I'm just saying that because I predict that's going to happen with Tom Brady. He's going to shoot up the draft boards. It probably shouldn't be, especially at 42. Not saying he's not going to be a bad quarterback. I'm just saying he's not going to put up the numbers that's going to justify other positions of need. How will this affect New England? So Jared Stidham played a little bit last year, but not really enough to get a sample size. But I think still, I would not waste a draft pick on Jared Stidham. He's somebody that you want to pick up on waivers and potentially and see how he does. But especially with New England, and as I talk about, I generally avoid New England fantasy players in general because they spread the ball around so much. That's partially why I was trying to avoid Tom Brady. But I think that with New England, they move the ball around so much, especially now that they really don't have any defined number one option. They're going to spread the ball around evenly. I think they'll still be successful enough to get by, and there'll be good streaming matchups to use Jared Stidham. I trust Belichick knows what he's doing, and Jared Stidham's going to have productive games at time. But this is somebody that you want to pick up on waivers. He's not somebody that you want to draft early. So I'm just saying that. Other free agent quarterback moves. So Philip Rivers went to the Colts. Isn't it weird? I feel like I've spent my entire football life growing up seeing Tom Brady on the Patriots and Philip Rivers on the Chargers, and now they both changed teams in the same season. That's just that's going to be weird to wrap my head around. But Philip Rivers on the Colts. So I think it's going to put Philip Rivers in a better chance to win, potentially. But I do not see Philip Rivers having a more productive season. In fact, I see him having a less productive season because of this. Because the Colts' offense in general was not very good, and I don't think that was really Jacoby Brissett's fault. I think it's partially the fault in that they just don't have... They had a lot of injuries last year. That really kind of derailed their success. But their offense is very conservative-based. They have T.Y. Hilton, who's a good receiver. Some decent tight ends like Jack Doyle. Eric Ebron left to the Steelers. But I just don't see Philip Rivers having as successful as a year as when he was on a team where he had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler, Melvin Gordon at times. So it's just for me, he downgraded his roster around him significantly, and I think Philip Rivers is also very turnover prone. Again, a guy that doesn't run the ball, so I'm personally staying away from him. I'm not going to be drafting him. I might potentially see what streaming options are out there if he's not drafted, but I'm curious to see what his draft position is going to be because it's probably going to be a lot higher than it should be. Another move that happened this offseason is Teddy Bridgewater moved from the Saints to the Panthers. And I do like this move for the Panthers. I think, he's a solid quarterback, especially for a rebuilding team. Good character guy. But I think, again, for fantasy, it's a difficult situation for me to see him doing well. This is going to be a Christian McCaffrey run offense. I think Bridgewater will be good in the fact that he won't turn the ball over. But he's not going to be as mobile as he was in Minnesota because of that knee injury that he had. And there's a lot of question marks for me that I do not feel comfortable drafting him. And I think he's probably going to be on waivers anyway, but just as an aside, I would personally not be rushing to pick this guy up. So an interesting one, though. I keep wanting to call them San Diego. They're Los Angeles Chargers. But basically, if they go with Tyrod Taylor, that would be a good sleeper pick in the waivers to get. Because Tyrod Taylor has historically been a quarterback who's very good at running the ball, does not turn the ball over. So he gives you a very good baseline. Not like Lamar Jackson, but similar to that concept, if you surround him with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, that could really have a good impact on his fantasy value. The question is he going to be the starter? Because there's questions: are they going to get Tua? Are they going to get Justin Herbert? What is their quarterback situation going to look like? But if they go with Tyrod Taylor, I would be really interested in the potential of using him as a stream-worthy quarterback to pick up on waivers. So keep that in mind. The Las Vegas Raiders, as they're now called, they picked up Marcus Mariota. I do not see him starting, but he's somebody that potentially what happens with Derek Carr, they could replace with Mariota. But neither of these quarterbacks are people I'm really looking at anyway. So, yeah, just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So that's most of the major quarterback moves. If I missed one, comment below, and I'll try to add my thoughts on it. But now let's go to the major wide receiver moves that I think will affect quarterbacks. So as I mentioned earlier, the DeAndre Hopkins trade, that's disappointing for me because there's been 3 years in a row that I've relied on the Watson and Hopkins stack, and it's done wonders for me. And then now all of a sudden they're not on the same team anymore. So that's difficult for me as a fan that does this to wrap my head around. But the trade was just stupid anyway. Like, why are you taking on David Johnson's contract? It's like you don't want to pay DeAndre Hopkins as a raise, which is what Bill O'Brien said the other day. But then you're willing to take all the money of a less productive player that's generally making about the same as what DeAndre Hopkins would have been making anyway. Like, that was just such a dumb decision. And I think that it's going to cost Houston a spot in the playoffs. So, but I think especially it's going to affect Deshaun Watson. I think he's still going to be easily top 10 quarterback. But so many of Deshaun Watson's games he relies on Hopkins so much for those red zone targets, for those third downs where he needs a guy that's got a sure-handed ability to catch the ball. But he doesn't have that anymore. Now he's relying on Will Fuller, who's seemingly always hurt. Kenny Stills, who's really not that consistent. And then Randall Cobb, who's really old now. So it's a downgrade for me, but he's still somebody that I think, especially with his value dropping, he might be worth a pickup depending on where his average draft position is. But for Kyler Murray, I think this is really going to cause him to shoot up the draft charts. This guy's hype is going to be a little high, but he's going to be a good sleeper pick to add because I think the two quarterbacks that are going to go the highest are Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And then probably Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady possibly because of those guys' hype. But Kyler Murray is going to be a good sleeper that you can pick up somewhere around the fifth quarterback position and could potentially break onto the scene like Lamar Jackson. So that's going to be I predict that's going to be a guy I'm talking about a lot in this offseason as somebody that you want to look at in these drafts. I'm just curious where his value is going to go because I don't really have a gauge on how people are rating him right now. Other random moves. So Stephon Diggs going to the Bills. I think that's good for the Bills. Josh Allen's value, I think, will go up. I think Josh Allen is another one of those Kyler Murray type guys that's a sleeper that you can get mid to middle of the draft and is going to give you a lot of value as a runner and a passer. And now that he's got Stephon Diggs as a receiver, I think that's really going to help his value. He's not a dominant receiver. He is very inconsistent. But I think that for the Bills system specifically, it's going to help Josh Allen, especially the fact that he has another year of experience in that offense. And then this is a little premature, but assuming that Joe Burrow is going to the Bengals, the fact that A.J. Green is coming back, Joe Burrow does have a lot of options to work with. He's got A.J. Green. He's got why am I blanking on that guy's name? Tyler Boyd. Yeah, so I mean, he's got some good values to work with, or good wideouts to work with. So he could potentially be somebody to look at in this draft. I think that raises his value for going to the Bengals because of the fact that A.J. Green will be there. He'll have some good weapons to work with, assuming that's who they take. And then, lastly, Jared Goff's value, I think, goes down with the loss of Todd Gurley because now that you don't have a dominant running back, they're going to focus more on the receivers like Cooper Kupp. Brandon Cooks, and I think that's just going to hurt Goff's value now that he doesn't have a dominant running back there. So, yeah, those are my takeaways. Comment below if you have ideas of things I could talk about. My plan next is to talk about free agency impacts of running backs. I'll talk about Melvin Gordon. I'll talk about Todd Gurley, things like that. And yeah, so comment below and let me know what you think. So thanks, guys. Bye.